Austrian culture values learning very highly. So if you're a scholar, it's just a great place to be.
Alan Miller was a US Fulbright scholar during the 2023-24 program year. During his grant period, he spent his time teaching Austrian students and working on his Fulbright project at the Sigmund Freud Museum. At the end of his time in Austria, we sat down with Alan to discuss his experiences in the country and the similarities and differences between the US and Austria.
So I'm here, as a lecturer at the Freud Museum, and the focus of my research is really on rhetoric and psychoanalysis. And so I'm completing a book on Cicero, uh, famous ancient rhetorician, and I'm really looking at the way rhetoric mobilizes concepts of that are pre-rational and sub-rational. And then I'm also looking at how that relates to political discourse today. So one of the really interesting things about being at the Freud Museum is that not just encountering other professors, you're encountering practicing psychoanalysts. And so I think that was the biggest surprise for me, is talking to people who don't just use Freud and think about Freud in an academic context, but are actually seeing patients and what their clinical practice has to offer in terms of a broader understanding of what Freud was all about. The commonalities are easy. You've got very smart students. I taught at a master's level class, so these are graduate students. They're very eager to learn, but there are different classroom cultures. Austrian classes are generally either seminar classes or lecture classes. And I'm teaching a lecture class. And in a lecture class in Austria, it's generally not there's not a premium put on students participating. They tend to sit back and take in the information, whereas US students have been trained early on that, whether it's a lecture class or it's a smaller class, that, they should be asking questions, they should be voicing opinions. So, it's a more of a one-way information highway. That's been interesting. I kind of knew that coming, so I prepared with that in mind. I've been participating in a series of lectures that they had at the Freud Museum called Freud and Antiquity. So that's been really interesting. I've been meeting both a lot of Austrian psychoanalysts, but also Austrian students there. And there's always a discussion at the end of every lecture. So that's been, one medium. Obviously, I talk to my students, even though my course is connected with antiquity. I use a lot of contemporary examples from US culture to illustrate points which they seem to like. I've been participating in the music scene in Vienna a lot. I've been to a lot of concerts, gone to the opera, been to the Schoenberg Center. And that's been an important part of Austrian culture for me, because music is such a central part of Vienna's identity. And it has a personal resonance to me. So that's been really important just on a personal level. Austrian history is very different than US history. The Austrian state is relatively new, created at the end of World War I. There's still a strong sense of a kind of multinational empire that was once headquartered in Vienna. I find that fascinating personally. I've always thought of Vienna as kind of a center of modern European culture, and it is. But one of the things that was really interesting being here is I hadn't realized actually how far it was from various parts of Western Europe. I say that because I took a train trip to Paris to go for a conference, and it was 12 hours. So, you know, Austria is at this kind of border between sort of Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe that makes it really a fascinating place. And that geographical location is part and parcel of its older international imperial history. But actually experiencing that on a concrete level and just seeing, what it was like to take a train from Vienna to Paris was fascinating in that regard. Austrian culture values learning very highly. So if you're a scholar, it's just a great place to be. I mean, an example that may seem trivial, but I think is emblematic is if you're online and you are trying to buy opera tickets, they're going to ask you for your academic title. Like, do you have a doctoral degree? Do you have a master's degree? I mean, that's something that would never happen in the United States, ever. And I will admit it feels a little strange, but it also feels nice. It's like, oh, somebody actually cares. I think that's, nice, but it's also symptomatic of a more profound sense that culture and learning are central parts of Austrian identity. You walk around the city and you're going, Sigmund Freud walked these streets, Ludwig Wittgenstein walked these streets. A block from where I'm living, Kurt Gödel lived. I saw the plaque up on the street. I'm 2 blocks from the church where Beethoven's body lay in state after he died. There's just so much cultural history just everywhere you turn. Not to even get into like the Klimt pictures. So for someone who is an academic, and particularly for someone in the humanities, um, there is so much to see here. One of the things I did while I was here, even though he was from Prague, but he was an citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and wrote in German, is I made sure to read like Kafka's Metamorphoses in German. And my German's not great, but I took my time and worked my way through, because you're getting this sense of what it was like to live in this sort of fascinating cosmopolitan multinational place. Vienna's really unique that way. When I started applying for this Fulbright, I had very little German, and I did take some classes. And while my German is not great, and I lecture in English, it was a very smart move on my part. I'm just able to participate more. It's easier for me to talk to the dry cleaner. I can listen to the radio some. I can go to lectures in my subject area that are in German, and if it's a subject that I know fairly well, I can get quite a lot out of it, which otherwise I would just be shut out of all that. So I do think having some basic German is really something that you should do. It also shows a degree of respect that your hosts will appreciate. I would note that the people at the Freud Museum, although they normally speak to me in English, when I arrived, I spoke German to them and they spoke German back. They quickly saw my German was halting, but they were so impressed that they still talk about it, that like you were the American who came and, you weren't already a native level German speaker and you tried. And so, people appreciate that. The other thing I'd say is, when you're getting ready to come, uh, just be open minded and relaxed. I mean, part of international travel, and I've traveled a lot internationally over the years. I used to be in charge of international relations at the University of South Carolina, so I literally have been all over the world. But the first thing you have to do is really say things are not going to be like they are at home, and that's why I'm here. Because if you're sort of constantly going, oh, I wish I had this, I wish I had that, you're going to be miserable. So, instead, just try and be as open as possible and realize that you're here because it's different. Otherwise, if you want it to be just like home, well, then, there's an easy way to do that.